are they? Furniture objects and your decorative objects. Basically just model them, UV them. Functionally, I'm only really going to look at the model and the topology. Just kind of like UV them if you have time. Unless you have specific questions and you're like, hey, please look at my UVs. Like I said, I'm probably not actually going to look at those. And then also start working on modeling the rest of the random filler objects for your scene. So, you know, anything that's just like not your main object, but you need to make the scene look complete. Start working on that, because after next week, it's pretty much going to be, the next week is have all of those finished, and then after that, it's kind of like free for all. You got a week to finish whatever's not done. So, you know, the more you can get done now, the less crunch time you're going to have to do for finals. And then just throw everything into your scene, and do one render for daylighting and one render for night lighting. And for each of those, if you want to test different angles, you can. So like pick an angle, render daylighting, pick a different angle, render night lighting. But that's pretty much the main thing for next week. Are there any questions on that? Cool. And then for what to submit, just a zip file with your Maya scene of your objects. I don't need the stuff with your, what was I saying? I don't need the full scene file with all of your objects in the scene, unless you have specific questions. I mostly just want the files with the specific objects in them. And then also include that updated render of the scene with whatever updated objects you have in terms of, you know, background objects, etc. Also, please include any reference images that you used for modeling, because they are helpful for me to actually reference how the shape of the objects turned out. That's pretty much this one. Any questions on this? Yes?
So when we're organizing the object folder, with it, you probably want textures to be in source images, right?
Yes.
Can we have, like, between source images, we have, like, separate, like, we have even more folders?
Oh, yeah.
Like, one for textures,
yeah.
so that way it's all not jumbled together?
Yes, totally fine. As long as, however you want to set up your folders, as long as just like keep all of your textures in source images. If you want to do subfolders within subfolders within subfolders, I've done that, it's totally fine. As long as everything, if I need to set the project to look at your textures, as long as everything links up, I don't really care what you do.
Also, I have some of, because not all my models were done in the room scene, they were done separately.
Yep.
Is it okay if those separate models, those Maya files, are in the assets folder rather than scenes?
Sure. Just leave me a note, otherwise I probably won't realize that I'm supposed to look for them there. Or I'll just try to open up your room object and be like, oh cool, your objects exist. But yeah, I mean, it also might be a little bit late-ish to move them if you put them somewhere else, just because if you referenced anything in, then...
Already there, that's why I was
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you put it there and your references are there, that's fine. Just leave a note or else, yeah, might lose them. Any other questions on this? All right. Other thing that is also due next week is the basically complete render of the turntable. So this week should have been due the render every 25th frame. Take whatever feedback you got from that in terms of, you know, the lighting is super dark, I can't see anything, or like camera angle's kind of weird. Incorporate that into your turntable, re-render the whole thing, and, well, render the whole thing for the first time. And then if you could also do, so I'm looking for two turntables, one that's just the, you know, regular textured render, the other one that's the textured render with the wireframe on it. That should take an extra maybe 20 minutes to render that, if that. The wireframes go really fast, and it should also be fairly straightforward to composite that onto your final render. So if you guys want, I can go over how to reset up like the wireframe, and just like how to set it up in a multiply layer. I'll show you in Photoshop. It's pretty much the exact same process in After Effects. You just import it as an image sequence, so it'll do it to all of your frames instead of just the one. But any questions on that part? Cool. Still downloading assignments. All right, and then in terms of the expectations, if there was any like major feedback given about stuff like, you know, you can't see the object because of the lighting, that kind of stuff I do expect to be updated in this new version. And then in terms of the wireframe itself, I would like the wireframe to be either a black outline, or if it's a really dark object, you could do a white outline, overlaid onto the original like rendered textured turntable. So I want to see the wireframe over the textured object. Again, I'll go over how to do that. It's pretty straightforward. And then turntable requirements for like having walls and stuff are all pretty much the same as last week. I've also relinked this little turntable tutorial in case that is helpful. In terms of the submission, if you could just submit 2 video files, one turntable with wireframe, one without. And this one, I actually would rather you not zip it. Blackboard Learn just lets me click on a video and it'll display it automatically, so I can just not download anything for this, which is why I would love if you didn't zip this one. But that's pretty much this. So any questions on that? Yep.
How many frames do we need for the turntable?
I would say at least 360. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. All right, so these are both due, the turntable and the furniture decorative models are both due next week. The assignment I'm about to go over is due week, I think that, this will be due week 10, so like the last class that we would have officially before finals. And that's pretty much just the kind of more or less free-for-all assignment where I'm like, model all of the rest of the background objects, finish texturing your furniture and decorative object, and just sort of systematically work through whatever isn't done. Mostly I would like you guys to focus on the background objects and textures for your furniture stuff. And then you can refine any of, if you have like, you know, the additional objects, you need to texture them later, that's something that can be done as kind of like a secondary thing between, what am I saying, between week 10 and week 11. So any questions about, you know, what exactly is due for this assignment? Cool. I would recommend, so for the background stuff, if the scene seems like it's a place that should be messy, I do expect it to be kind of like messy and cluttered looking. Obviously, if you're doing something like a hospital, which I don't think anyone is, but like that's not somewhere you'd expect to see stuff laying around on the floor. But if it's somewhere like a kid's room or whatever, there probably is a bunch of just like stuff laying around. So if you guys find yourself struggling to make extra just sort of stuff objects, think of things that are like similar shapes that you could sort of make one model, UV it, and then do very minor changes to the model and the textures to create variation. So stuff like books is a really good example. If you're doing a workshop, you could do, you know, make one can of spray paint and just put a bunch of different textures on it. Stuff like that is going to make your scene look a lot more full, but like need a lot less effort in terms of just creating 50 different assets. And then for the texture of the furniture and decorative, I'm kind of like, it's one of those ones where it's like I would like you to do something, so at least at a minimum, get some like color maps in there for, you know, whatever color designs need to be on the object. Realistically, I realize that like, especially if you have like a really complex scene with a lot of extra models, this might take up a lot of time. So I'm not going to grade the textures for the final furniture and decorative as heavily, but I will give, you know, higher marks if you have like super nice looking complete textures compared to like it's a Lambert ? But yeah. And then I do still want renders for this. Little like more specific, I guess, for this week. So I've linked here's a link to the final submission for like what's due for the actual final. I would like you to start working on your render angles for the actual final in week 10 so that you can get feedback on them before the final comes. So again, I've linked the file here, but I'll show you which renders that you will do for that week. So for the final, if you scroll down, there's a bunch of different renders listed out. The ones that I would like you to test for this assignment is the in-environment renders. Not so much the ones with like object renders where you're just like doing pretty renders of your individual objects. I want the ones of your whole environment. And basically what that is at least 4 renders for both day and night lighting. One of these renders must highlight your hero object, the one that you made. It should be, you know, fairly large in the render since it's your focal piece object. And you have at least one other render that has to contain your furniture and decorative objects. Again, the ones that you made. If they pop up, if they're both in the same render, that's fine. If they're, you know, far apart from each other in the space, you can do one render for each. It doesn't super matter to me, as long as I see each of your objects clearly in at least one render. Does that make sense? Cool. And then for the other ones, so I said 4+. If you have extra renders left over, you want to do more, just do some interesting camera angles, show off, you know, whatever architectural details or like cool texturing or something that you did in the scene. Just kind of whatever you want to highlight is the rest of them. But basically, I would like you to repeat each of these camera placements. So for each camera angle, render it once in daylight and once in night light, just so you can see how the two different lightings compare from the same camera angle. Does that make sense? Cool. And so that is, again, pretty much the renders for this. And then if you could just submit a zipped Maya project folder, including all of the renders that I just mentioned, and any textures, Maya files, and reference images you've used in the final scene. If you wouldn't mind deleting any, if you have like renders from previous assignments, previous weeks or whatever, either preferably just get rid of them, but if not, at least like label them, because sometimes it's confusing to me if I just see like a bunch of different iterations and I'm like, I don't know which one's this week's. But yeah, so that's pretty much that assignment. After that, it really is just kind of like freeform it up and finish everything else off. But any questions on this one? All right. Any questions on, fantastic, any of the other assignments before we move on? All right. So for some reason, it seems like your assignments are legitimately cursed, and